Hello, everyone. My name is Mark McNamee, and I am the director here of Europe for FrontierView. I am joined here by Martin Belchev, the associate practice leader for Europe at FrontierView, as well as Katrina Perner, who is the senior analyst for Europe here at FrontierView as well. We are here today to give you a very brief summary of some events to watch for 2023. We have just released our global events to watch for 2023, looking at a range of disruptive events that could have a significant impact, of course, on multinationals' plans for next year. And today, specifically, we'd like to walk you through some of the specific events to watch for related directly to Western Europe. As a reminder, these are events to watch that are significant, disruptive events that fall outside of our base case assumptions for next year. So these are things that have a likelihood greater than 10%, so non-negligible risk, but are also important enough that we think they should be on the radar for senior executives and monitored as part of risk mitigation. In some cases, it makes sense to build contingency plans for them if they are substantially disruptive to your plans. And every year, as a reminder, several, if not most, of the events to watch that we do flag often take place. So a word of warning that these are not just hypotheticals and something businesses really should be creating contingency plans for. That said, the chart you are seeing here now, as is visible here to walk you through sort of the x-axis and the y-axis. On the x-axis, you have the likelihood of this event occurring. Again, a minimal likelihood ranging from 10% all the way up to 40–45%, so outside of the base case. And then on the y-axis here, you can see in terms of timing, right? How quickly, in terms of at the high end, days to weeks to months, you could see this event occurring and then impacting business. And then as well, the size of the bubble is related to the scale of the impact for businesses if the event were to take place. So as you can see, for example, gas rationing in the EU, rather elevated, but then also highly impactful compared to the other bubbles. So with that said, I'd like to hand it over to Martin and Katrina to highlight, going through each of these, the following events for Western Europe. Martin?
Thank you, Mark. So just to start with the events that have the highest likelihood of happening, and what's important to remember here is that the fact that the region seeing so many acute risks is actually suggests that MNC should be revisiting their scenario planning really for 2023 and 2024. But starting with this high likelihood events, the first big one is obviously the possibility of a government-mandated gas rationing in the EU. Now, this applies for next winter and will be triggered by the ongoing supply crunch in LNG and the fact that governments and countries in general might be unable to tap into additional supplies going into next year, which will keep prices high, which is already part of our base case. But the problem here is that this shortages might result in governments across Western Europe introducing sharp restrictions on how industries and consumers use gas, which will significantly deteriorate the outlook. Another big event is the possibility of a much more hawkish ECB monetary policy, which would be triggered by a much more hawkish Fed policy and a higher than expected inflation, which will see interest rates rising above 3.5 to 4% from our current base case at 3%, which will further increase pressures on bond yields, increasing external borrowing costs, further deepening the fiscal difficulties that governments are experiencing when it comes to supporting their economies. Now, a relatively small event, but still relatively high in likelihood, is the Nordics housing market crash. Now, this has to do with the fact that we are already seeing some easing in house price and property price in general in the Nordics. This triggered by the high inflationary environment and the fact that the regional central banks are increasing interest rates substantially, which essentially has created a bubble. Now, we still expect a bit of a soft landing here, but the point is, should the situation exacerbate, we might see substantial pressures on the Nordics banking and financial system, which obviously will have a wider spillover effect on the rest of Europe. And now there are a few specifically political events in Southern Europe that are worth highlighting, and I'll ask Katrina to elaborate a bit on them.
Sure. The first has to do with Spain, which is set to hold elections by December of 2023. Currently, the polls put the People's Party, which is a center-right party, ahead. However, it's unlikely that they will garner a sufficient number of votes to form a majority government on their own. Our base case scenario assumes that they will form a minority, but there is a possibility that the continuation of this cost of living crisis is actually going to help boost support for the far-right party Vox. And if they perform strongly enough in next year's election, it may be very difficult for the People's Party not to enter into a formal coalition with them. Now, there is already a precedence for this. The People's Party and Vox did form a coalition government at a regional level earlier this year, so this is not out of the realm of possibility. The concern here is that they are a far-right party, a very nationalist party. They could exacerbate tensions with Catalonia, which is one of the most as one of the wealthiest autonomous regions in Spain, creating a greater degree of uncertainty and therefore rattling markets and undermining business confidence in Spain. The other concern or other event to highlight here is that Italian populism could undermine the surprisingly fiscally prudent or somewhat fiscally prudent stance that Prime Minister Meloni has struck in Italy. She has struggled to really exert her authority over the coalition, and there's the possibility that Matteo Salvini, who's a leader of the League, could seek to take advantage of her less than adept political skills and become much more powerful and influential within the coalition, undermining, as I say, the more fiscally prudent policies that she's attempted to implement. This would be quite problematic in the context of Italy, given the fact that they are already facing quite high borrowing costs. They have a very high debt to GDP level, and this would certainly worsen the economic outlook for Italy.
And in terms of, I guess, smaller likelihood events, but still having quite a potentially disastrous economic impact, is first the potential breakdown the UK-EU negotiations over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Now, we still have this at a relatively small likelihood, especially considering that the new UK government has actually indicated a much softer stance on the issue, and there doesn't seem to be too much appetite on the side of the EU to really drag this out too much, especially considering the uneasy macroeconomic environment. However, this, of course, still remains a risk, and should we see this breakdown in relations, break down the attempted renegotiations, and also potential trade measures imposed by the EU on the UK. This will first weigh substantially on both currencies, but will also lead to significant deterioration in trade between the two countries, potentially deepening the crisis we are already expecting. Now, another one is Germany's coalition falls apart. Now, this again a relatively small likelihood event, and this is reflects the fact that there are some internal inconsistencies and disagreement within the coalition between the Greens, the FDP, and the SDP. And the major problem here is that some more controversial policies, and this might include controversial stance and policies on issues such as energy, the war on Ukraine, and so on, might trigger the FDP or the Greens potentially walking out. Again, this is still a relatively low likelihood event, but in that case, we do see an uptick in policy and predictability in fiscal policy making. This will constrain the government's ability to be able to support the economy, especially throughout these difficult few quarters. Another one, this is a bit of a positive event, is the possibility of Netherlands increasing gas output. Now, that's still very low likelihood, especially considering how controversial such a move would be. But as it stands, the Netherlands said to decrease gas output by around 50% in 2023 and completely stop gas mining in the Groningen fields. Now, considering how tight gas supplies are, it might be prudent for the government to actually delay this decision. But it's important to point out that even in the case of this upside, we can still very much see increased output in the Netherlands, still substantial issues in gas supply in Europe, considering that the overall gas going in the market will be relatively small in terms of annual consumption. Another major one, again, involving political risks, being France, and I'll ask Katrina to elaborate a bit more on that.
Sure, thanks, Martine. So the legislative environment in France has become considerably more challenging since elections in June, when Macron lost his majority in the legislature. Most recently, we saw the government have to push through its 2023 budget without submitting it for a parliamentary vote. We do expect that the environment is going to become even more fractious. The prospect for reforms is dimming, and it is possible that Macron might just simply decide it is impossible for him to really follow through on his mandate, given the current composition in the legislature, and could call fresh elections next year. Now, the timing for this would be somewhat limited. We wouldn't expect him to call the election in the winter in the midst of an energy crisis, nor in the summer when people want to be off on their vacations, on their holidays, and don't want to be bothered by political concerns, or in the autumn when there's the possibility that we could have some difficulties with energy supplies again. So most likely if this did occur, it would probably be in the latter part of spring. Currently, the polls do not point to a legislative composition that would be considerably different than the one we currently have. So we would effectively probably be back in a stalemate situation unless, of course, we found he was able to find a coalition partner in the center-right Les Républicains, who are actually due to elect a new leader in December.
And just as a final, again, I would highlight the fact that what me and Katrina are describing essentially is just a mix of macroeconomic and political events that present significant risks to the outlook. So again, scenario planning is essential, and as Mark mentioned in the beginning, we often see at least one of these events materializing throughout the forecasted year. So it's crucial that MNCs, channel partners, plan for these and really account them in their medium to long-term strategic planning.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, both of you. For more information or a detailed walk through any of these, please contact your client relationship director. And if you haven't yet, please take a look at our Global Events to Watch report on our portal. Thank you for your time and have a great day.